Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation, a Stranger Things podcast. I'm Robin.
I'm Heidi.
And today we are going to be discussing Volume 2 again.
Well, you are going to be discussing Volume 2 again. This
Yes.
is my first shot at it.
Yeah. We actually originally weren't sure if we were going to be able to do this together, and so that was partly why I split up the conversation between Jenna and I with now this conversation. But yeah, I'm really happy that you were able to come on so we can chat.
Yeah. So I will disclose, just getting it, kind of out there right out of the gate. I had some pretty complex feelings and reactions to Volume 2, which we will get into. And I knew that I was going to need a little bit of time in order to be objective and to be fair to myself, to be fair to the material. So yeah, I'm happy to be able to jump on the mic and talk about it. I feel messy about season 4. There is so much that I really, really like. There's so much that I really like on a, hey, I'm watching this and this is fun level. There's so much that I like on a, oh yeah, no, this is really good because this means what. And there's so much in terms of the really beautiful performances and the beautiful cinematography, and there is so much to really, really highly praise. And then there is so much that's just this incredible letdown. So it leads to me feeling, as I said, really, really messy.
Just like with Jenna, let's start with the good.
I did actually quite like the Russia arc. I was expecting to find it to be bloated, like some of the other arcs. There were a couple things that I thought were maybe a little bit silly, but there was nothing in that arc that I thought was why are we spending time on this, etc., etc. It was exciting, and I will persist in calling him Enzo because that's the only name I really know him by. I really loved the characterization, the performance. He kept me kind of on my toes, wondering if he was going to end up betraying them at the end just for his own self-preservation, but I was really, really glad he didn't. I was glad they didn't go in that direction. I loved the conversation between Joyce and Hopper about the imaginary date that led to the kissing. I thought that had the exact right flavor of humor and tenderness and sexiness, and it was really good. But yeah, I found that arc as a whole really, really satisfying. I loved the continued relationship development between the new members of the party and the established members of the party. The conversation between Steve and Robin was fantastic.
Which, the one where they're making the Molotov cocktails?
Yeah, no, I loved that.
Yeah. Pretty much anything with Steve and Robin at this point is pretty much gold.
Extremely fair. The scene where they are attacking Vecna with the Molotov cocktails and the shotgun, that was fantastic.
Yes.
10 out of 10, no notes, etc.
Yeah. Actually, I was kind of shocked that I didn't mention that in our last episode because I've watched that sequence a couple times just on YouTube because it really is pretty tremendous, which is saying something because I think structurally it ends up creating this really nice, it's a bit of a mood booster because that's right after Max has fallen. Mm-hmm. It precedes Max's quote unquote death, but because so much bad has happened, to have this moment of just the slow-mo and then to the remix of Running Up That Hill.
Yeah,
I love the remix. It's so good.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
The kind of spookiness of Max hiding in that memory of the dance and then the balloon starting to pop and being filled with blood, I thought that was really, really appropriately scary, really appropriately spooky, very well conceived, the layering in of the old music over the over the more modern music. There were a lot of things in part 2 that I really, really enjoyed. Argyle, as always a pleasure.
Mind fight. Sick.
Or
whatever he said, yeah.
Try before you deny, which Argyle, I have tried pineapple on pizza. I am sorry, my love, I did not enjoy it.
But you don't like pineapple in general.
I don't like the existence of pineapple.
Yes. It's not limited to pizza.
Yeah. But on pizza is one of the things people have been I know you don't like it usually, but try it on pizza. And I'm ugh. did try it, I promise. But yeah, there were a lot of really great things. I mean, any moment that Eddie was on screen, apart from one or two moments, was
one in particular.
I actually really loved the conversation between Nancy and Jason.
Me too.
Bro, I am like always here for these kinds of like Kenneth Branagh, when he directs, almost always has one of these scenes where you have like a person who is a sympathetic character and a person who is not a sympathetic character, and they're like in some sort of situation where they're face to face and they're having like three, and like nobody else is there, and they're just talking to one another, but they're actually having like three different conversations at the same time. And so you have like the surface level conversation, and then you have the subtext of what's going on, and you have character A is trying to keep character B from doing something, and character B is like trying to communicate like, I'm going to do the thing you don't want me to do, or I'm going to find this out, or I'm going to get you, or like whatever. But like all of it is happening like through facial expressions and a totally irrelevant surface level conversation. Like that is catnip to me. And for like a long portion of that conversation between Nancy and Jason, that's exactly what was going on. Now at the end, he was like showing his colors because, you know, he's pretty unhinged by that point. But yeah, supremely acted.
Well, and Nancy is like matching his energy though. That's what makes that so like they're both escalating. Mm-hmm. And I remember I said to you when we were watching it how much I appreciated that Steve doesn't come over and like extract her from that situation. Right. Like he doesn't rescue, like Nancy holds her own in that moment, and I loved that.
Yeah.
Jason as a character sort of feels a little bit like, I'm not saying that they're actually like super similar, but he feels like in concept a little bit like an escalation of season 2 Billy.
Yeah.
Not even in the sense of like, oh, he's what Billy could have become or anything like that. Just in terms of the sort of street level amount of interaction that he has with specifically the younger characters and the teenagers too, in terms of the threat that he poses to them and to the narrative at large, like how much of a disruption he is, and in the way that he often shows up. I found it reminded me of season 2 Billy in some ways, but an escalation of that threat.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct. Billy is kind of like a diamond in the rough, and Jason is like a refined diamond in terms of just how dangerous he is. And in some ways, in terms of how well his character is developed. We don't know pretty much anything about Jason's backstory or like his childhood or anything like that. Like we know more about Billy's life. But in terms of crystallizing the worldview, Jason is terrifying because he is so fully realized. Kind of a contrast to one of the things that I was so excited about in Volume 1 of Vecna being a human villain. All he says is, well, I want to destroy it and then build something beautiful. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. That's just mustache twisting. Whereas I think they gave all of the energy that honestly probably Vecna really could have benefited from. I think they gave it all to Jason. I'm not mad that Jason exists. He is not a pleasant character. I am not sympathetic toward Jason. I am not justifying Jason. Like, Jason is a shithead. But he is an incredibly valuable character in the conversation that he inspires, in the way that he demonstrates how white supremacist Christian fascism shows up and like what the consequences of coddling those worldviews are. I think he's a great character in terms of being like a very valuable villain. And not every villain has to like demonstrate all the world's evils, but he is a great one that actually does that. But what I think ends up happening is that Vecna is just, he's boring now. Mm-hmm. And he was so fascinating before.
Yeah.
I joked around after Volume 1. I was like, give me a functioning iPod and send me into the Upside Down. I'll get this bitch. You know? But that's just kind of me being bravado and whatnot. But now I feel like if you really like step back and look at like what Vecna is and what he's doing, he is less violent, less destructive, and less dangerous than like your average suburbanite. He wants to wreck what's there and make something new. Okay, we humans, we wreck shit all the time to make something new. That's why we have diminishing rainforests.
Well, I mean, it gets interesting if you start thinking about it in terms of, particularly if you look at it through the lens of season 2 in particular, because like something that I talked a lot about when I was by myself in that season was the fact that you look at the way in which the demodogs and the caves, the tunnels, and the way that infection was actually spreading, the rate at which it was spreading was going to have a very real world impact. And I liked that. And I kind of like this idea that is something that Vecna was attached to. But it is yet another example of how their best stuff is when they're grounded. Jason and Billy from season 2, they are very, very grounded villains. Yeah. Brenner is a very grounded villain. So I just think it's interesting that then you take Vecna where he started in kind of a grounded, albeit fantastical, but fantastically grounded, if that makes sense.
I mean, he's a serial killer with superpowers.
But then they like escalated it.
Yeah.
And it kind of took away some of what made him the most interesting.
Yeah.
And Jenna commented on that a little bit too.
I think the same can actually be said for Brenner in this season. One of my big beefs in volume 2 is that they're doing a lot to try to make it that like he was right or justified in some twisted way. And I feel like they kind of forced it. If I loved the Russia arc, by and large, what is going on with Elle? I don't know. I understand that they might have got into an issue of the show has got so big and there are so many like concurrent arcs going on.
Oh, yeah.
And that maybe they were concerned like Elle is our main character. Like she needs to have a journey this season because she's the main character. Whereas like there was so much other stuff going on that Elle could very much have become kind of a background character. I do understand that. I think that the solution to that was to do something to like bring everybody back to Hawkins, have her break up with Mike. If she was in Hawkins, she would have like found out, like especially like she would have heard from the Hawkins party about what happened to Chrissy. She would have like recognized what was going on. It would have been like we did not need Brenner this season. You could make an argument that we needed Owens, but we didn't need Brenner. We didn't need the whole like we have to work with Papa. Honestly, her having to go on this like enormous journey to get her powers back is kind of bullshit. Her like overextending herself and not being able to access her powers for a little while after the conclusion of season 3, totally get it, totally buy it. Mm-hmm. I'm not happy for her.
Yeah,
but it makes total sense. Mm-hmm. But her powers just going like poof and never coming back after everything that we've witnessed. Her going through to get her powers quote unquote back or to unlock them or whatever. I don't think we actually needed any of that. She could have just rewatched the recordings from her old sessions. She could have rewatched the recording of Vecna being a school shooter. Mm-hmm. There was no need to bring Brenner in, or if they were going to bring him in, they really tried to make him a complicated, but he was doing the best he could. No.
I think part of this is also the whole, them moving them to California. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'm noticing. Like, did we need that relocation? Yeah, it got spread too thin. There was too much going on.
I struggle with Elle's arc this season because despite it supposedly being about her regaining her power, it's actually very, very significantly undercuts her power. And that really bothers me.
Yeah.
As an audience member, as a person who has loved Elle from like season 1, episode 1, as a person who has seen Elle as both a healthy example of strong female character and also as a subversion of the, stereotype of strong female character, it bums me out. And I do see ways that it could have been avoided. We had to have Vecna survive the fight, quote unquote, beat Elle, so that we can bring Vecna back as the final boss for season 5. But it's almost like a sequencing or like an editing thing. Like if they had the bad thing happen And like we'll get to how I feel about what happened to Max. But if they had the loss scene and then had Elle simultaneously kick his ass while Nancy Stephen Robin kicked his ass, and then found that, you know, he had actually not died, I think that would have been better, because then we don't have triumph, loss, that second half of that episode became so jumbled that you weren't actually able to have time to process any of the emotions that were just coming at you at 85 miles an hour before you had to move on to the next thing. So, like, I wasn't able to process losing Eddie and losing Max, or beating Vecna, or not beating Vecna.
That's to some degree why I'm encouraged to hear that for season 5, they are going to narrow the scope. They're going to narrow it back to just Hawkins, and they're going to try to mirror the groupings that they had for season 1, which is fascinating to me, because if they're going to mirror that, that means that Will and Steve are not connected to any particular group. So I'm just curious as to where that will leave them. But yeah, it's funny.
With Dustin.
Well,
the heart.
But that makes me want to ask you, because so much of our conversations in the first season was about how so many of the male characterizations were founded in empathy, and especially Mike. Now that we sit here at the end of season 4, how has that progressed, in your opinion, over the course of the 4 seasons?
I miss it. I miss it a lot. I know you have complex feelings about Jonathan's conversation with Will. I do too. But we do see that empathetic side of Jonathan coming out toward Will, you know, in volume 2. And also, like, even his feelings of empathy, you know, toward Argyle. So, like, Jonathan kind of, like, I don't know, gets kissed by the prince and comes back to life in volume 2.
Yeah.
So I did like that. But I actually think that all of in the same way that I just said, like, oh, you know, they gave all the development to Jason that they could have done to Vecna. Eddie and Dustin got everything that Mike used to get. And I think Will, too. But Will is not both, you know, praise and criticism. Will is no different. Will has not shifted in terms of, you know, becoming more a teenager or growing apart or that kind of thing. Will is the same precious, wonderful, you know, boy that he has always been. So he is still very, like, founded in empathy. I mean, the ability to sit there and tell the person that you are in love with how much somebody else is in love with them and how nothing is ever going to change and they are always going to be, like, that takes so much love, so much compassion and empathy and maturity and selflessness.
Interesting. So you read that scene as him actually in earnest talking about 11.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny, because I definitely did not interpret it that way. Yeah, Elle feels these ways for you. Elle doesn't want to lose you. Like, I definitely heard a lot of, to me, it was all double meaning. It was all, he's saying 11, but he's talking about himself, which is what clues Jonathan into. But that's just how I read it.
I agree, but I think he means it about both of them.
Oh, like,
and
it's both.
Yeah.
Got it.
He sees how much Elle is in love with Mike and how much Mike is in love with Elle. And not only are the two of them in love with each other, he loves both of them separately from how he feels romantically about Mike. It is very clear to me that Will loves Elle. My thing is, like, I love the idea of Will being canonically gay. And I have seen a lot of people saying, like, yeah, like, you know, when you're gay, like, being in love with your straight best friend is kind of like a rite of passage. I don't want to take away from people who are really identifying with that experience. But what I do want to say is that with everything else that was going on in season 4, we did not have time to give Will the grace to deal with that as delicately as Will deserves as a character, or as I want for Will as a character. So I do wish that all of these conversations had happened, but that they had not been centered around Will being in love with Mike. I wish that Will had met another person who we don't even need to like see this person. Doesn't even need to be on screen, doesn't need to be a character, doesn't need to take up more time and space. But I feel like it would be so much less cruel of an experience for Will to be in love with another person and just not know how to talk to Mike about it, not know how to talk to Jonathan or even Elle about it, versus having to be in love with Mike, not know how to come out, and then having to watch everything that happens. And also trying to be there for Elle and not like it's too much. Like, that's a season in and of itself.
Well, but I mean, I would trade the Steve, Nancy, Jonathan love triangle for that.
Mm-hmm.
Since Schnapp has confirmed that Will is gay and that he does have feelings for Mike, the Mary Sue, which is a publication that I run hot and cold with as far as like agreeing with them, but they had an article about it, and there were a couple of things that they said that I found I really agree with and kind of add another layer to this whole conversation. So I'm going to read a couple quotes. Quote, "The problem is that Will's entire storyline has been suffering and sadness. The excuse of the time period doesn't hold water either, because by 1986, issues of gay rights were in the mainstream conversation, especially since HIV and AIDS had a hold in the country. Stranger Things has made a very heteronormative world and then put its two gay characters in pining, painful situations. They have not given these characters a community, except with other straight people. It isn't just about finding love. It is about finding that community that they can fully be themselves in." End quote.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, and that kind of underscores what I've been saying all along, which is like, reframe that beginning. That speaks to like, he's building a new group of friends in California.
Yeah. Or maybe he tried his hand at being DM, now that he's out in California.
Yeah. Like, honestly, at this point, I'm like, Will, wait till you're back in Hawkinson. Come out to Dustin, man. Like,
yeah.
Dustin is your heart. He's the one who will be like, dude, it's cool.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Another, like, absolutely, like, standout, shining aspect of this season is Caleb McLaughlin and Priya Ferguson.
Absolutely.
Especially when they are together. I mean, you very much when they're separate, but especially when they're together. And I have to say, like, as heartbreaking and upsetting, both, like, as an invested viewer and as a like critical viewer, like, both. The scene where Max dies and then Erica comes in is just so incredibly acted, and it's so subtle. And I mean, Max's death is not subtle, but the emotions at play are so deftly handled. And the way that, like, I know that Caleb McLaughlin ad-libbed the line asking Erica for help. Incredible. The long drawn out, like, 3-minute panic attack between Jason and Lucas was also incredibly well acted with McLaughlin. Like, Lucas saying, "I never should have knocked," was just, it was fantastic. Everything about that. And even the thing of, like, Jason being the one that and, like, not even intentionally, he's just being his shitty self, destroying the Walkman, and Lucas's just reaction to that. Like, he doesn't have time to, like, react to the implications of what has just happened when he's still trying to, like, save his own life. And like, all of that was just incredible.
Oh my God. The way McLaughlin says, "Stay with me."
Yeah.
The performances across the board, the whole season, the whole cast, everybody.
Any beef that I have with season 4, or any, like, disappointments I have, none of them are with the actors. Even McLaughlin's performance when Max was sitting there and like kind of trying to do the, like, "Hey Vecna, hey Vecna, come and get me," when Lucas turned and started talking to her, and she didn't realize that he was Vecna yet. But then, like, the bleeding into that,
We all knew.
But it was so cool the way he acted it, because he didn't morph into like talking the way Vecna would talk, or presenting the way, or using a tone similar to Vecna for like a long time. And that's what made it so effective and so frightening. Just amazing. So I am not suggesting that this is going to be canon, but something that I have found very charming was all of the ways that people are theorizing that Eddie might still be alive. One of them is Eddie held up that tape of Iron Maiden. And
This is music!
This is music! Which people have memed this shit out of.
I love it so
and
much.
I love it.
I love it. Anyway.
He holds up the Iron Maiden tape. Now, Iron Maiden has a, like, character who's on the cover of a lot of their albums and so on and so forth. And apparently he has, like, a whole backstory and everything. But, like, this mummy zombie type character. And his name is Eddie. In our universe, in, like, a couple months after the events of Stranger Things Volume 4, Iron Maiden released a new album with Eddie on the cover, and there's like graffiti on the street that says Eddie lives. So people are suggesting, this is an Easter egg of some kind that, Eddie lives. And then in D&D, Vecna has this like right-hand man whose name is Kaz. And so folks are suggesting that perhaps like Eddie will have been infected by the bats and that he will come back as Vecna's like Kaz, but then they will like be able to rescue him and like get real Eddie back. And then other people are talking about how season 4 was so heavily influenced by Nightmare on Elm Street, and everybody does come back at the end on that one. So like maybe everybody will come back. And I am not endorsing any of these theories, but I think that it's very sweet. I think it's an indication of just how devastating a loss Eddie has been. As charming as I find people's reactions and trying to like, pull a mulligan and bring him back, I hate that he died with every fiber of my being. I actually re-listened to our Volume 1 recap, kind of in prep for this conversation. And I joked that, I've only had Eddie for 3 days, but, if he dies, I'm going to reach through the screen and save him myself. But I found that I had a very, very strong, upsetting reaction to his death. There's no narrative goal that is achieved by his death. The only thing that I have heard is that, they killed him because they had to raise the stakes because people so seldom die. People die all the time in this fucking show. Alexi died, Bob died, Barb died. All of those people in Hawkins died when the earthquake happened. Elle lost against Vecna. All those teenagers died. Chrissy died. Chrissy was a really compelling character. Like, we get very, very little time with her, so she's not as compelling as she could have been if we had more time with her. But a cheerleader who's, like, super goody two-shoes, who's willing to, like, hurt herself in order to continue to be thin, who clearly is tormented by her parents, who, like, has all of these pressures, being willing to seek out someone like Eddie and say, hey, can you give me horse tranquilizers? Because I need a nap. That is interesting. Mm-hmm. And they killed her. And I'm, like, not happy about it. But I feel her death raises the stakes. Her death sets the stakes in a really compelling way. You don't need Eddie's death. Even if you were trying to say something like, he had to buy them more time. They didn't need more time. The bats killed him and then immediately died.
That's exactly the same thing I said about the ending of season 3 when Billy died.
Yeah.
Like, the cavalry gets there immediately after.
Yeah. And it's stupid. It's pointless. And the other thing is, I think the reason that it was so deeply upsetting, because it's one thing if you like a character and that character dies and you're sad. I feel that way in some ways about Max.
Well, that's how you felt about Alexi, yeah?
That's how I felt about Alexi. Yeah. Very much. That's how I felt about Bob. That's how I felt about Barb. We did have more time with Barb. With Eddie. Eddie is a person who has struggled with acceptance in his community. He has built his own community with his Hellfire Club, with his friends, and throughout the course of the season with the larger party, you know, because Max and Robin and Steve, you know, they're not part of Hellfire, but they become part of his community. Whatever went on in his childhood, he's not living with his parents, he's living with his uncle. He has a very clearly loving relationship with his uncle. Eddie, being who he is, and the love that he gives to the people that he cares about, the love that he shows towards Dustin, even the love he shows towards Chrissy, and he doesn't even really know her. He's incredibly gentle with her.
I would even argue, like, you know, I know people ship them, but I mean platonically, the way that I would say the conversation that we talked about in Volume 1 between he and Steve is actually very loving.
Incredibly so. Yeah. Yes. Very, very valuable. I understand him having PTSD after what happened to Chrissy. I understand him blaming himself after what happened to her. I don't think he should. I don't think any of the other characters blame him. And even in the conversation where he talks about what happened, they're very clearly supportive of him, like, being alive. But there's no reason for him to commit suicide. And I'm saying that extremely deliberately because he felt that he had done something so shameful.
Or that he didn't have any value.
That's a very dangerous thing to have your characters doing. And I struggle with saying that because it's like, my emotional well-being and the audience's emotional well-being is not the responsibility of the Duffer Brothers. But again, it's another thing exactly like Elle's arc. I don't think they thought about the implications, because essentially what like the narrative is now saying is Eddie didn't even fuck up. Eddie thinks he fucked up. And the only thing that he can do is die. And honestly, in my more irritated moments, I think the only reason they killed him is because they didn't know how to resolve the whole thing of, like, everybody thinking that he killed Chrissy. It's so easy to resolve that.
Theoretically, Owens is if they can hand wave away 11, if they can, like,
yeah,
you know, like, repurpose her identity, give her a new identity, they can do the same thing for Eddie.
Yeah. I mean, I would have preferred he stay in Hawkins and still be an active member of the party and be friends with Dustin and whatnot. But I would have taken him going into witness protection over death.
Yes, same.
Having Dustin have to shoulder that burden of being there with him and trying to, like, carry on his legacy, and it's too much. And I think, like, the thing that I came away with in, like, the couple of days following watching that episode, you know, for the first time, was I am tired of death. I have to every day look at the news and see people dying who didn't deserve to die, who didn't put themselves in a situation where death was an expected outcome. People going to the movies, going to school, going to work, and dying. People getting sick despite years at this point of trying to protect themselves and dying. Why do I have to see people who don't deserve it dying all the time, even in my escapist media? And again, the Duffer Brothers are not responsible for my emotional well-being. I am. But I feel like, not just in Stranger Things, but kind of like in pop culture as a whole, there's an incredible disconnect with the zeitgeist. People loved Eddie so much. How could you not understand how much fun people were going to have with him? And why would you kill him? And again, you know, being fair, from an objective, critical standpoint, I don't feel like it served anything. But ultimately, I don't like it. Makes me feel dumb for having cared about the show and about the characters. It makes me question whether I should keep watching. It makes me question whether I should have watched it all. We used to have a mutual friend who, anytime we would go to the movie theater and there would be some sort of, like, emotional scene, he would, like, lean over to look at me to see if I was crying. And he framed it as this kind of like affectionate thing. Like, oh, hi. But it was always like, are you crying? And I feel like that's what that scene was doing to me. Are you crying? Are you crying? Yes. Yes, I am. Yeah, it's just a really big bummer.
Like, if you're gonna have it be that, damn, we lost, have them all register that. Because Eddie's death would have a huge ripple effect. And yet, as Jenna pointed out, it's kind of all on Dustin.
Yeah.
I mean, look to the heroes sequence in season 1 when they think that Will is dead.
Eddie and Max's death were extremely triggering to me. And it did not help matters that they were on top of each other.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, on that note, why don't we talk about Max?
Yes.
Let's go ahead.
Not undercutting what I said about Lucas and his depth of character and everything going on in the scene where, you know, he's trying to save Max. I again feel like I'm being made fun of for caring or being invested. I was so moved by episode 4, Max's ability to escape from Vecna. I think it's very clear that Vecna himself is a psychopath, but his method of attack is extremely metaphorical for depression and suicidality. He traps you in your mind and he twists and warps things to mean something that they absolutely don't mean. Lucas would never, ever say to Max that she was a bad person for wanting Billy out of her life. Never. That's how Vecna operates. That's also how depression operates. Max was pulling away from all of the people that she loved most because she was afraid of how they would think and feel about her if they knew these thoughts that she had had about Billy. So her ability to choose very intentionally, because like they created the gateway for her to come out, but she had to be the one to do the work. She had to be the one to choose to attack the monster and run and keep running, even when all of these obstacles were being thrown at her. It was so beautiful. I'm not mad at the idea of her continuing to have quote unquote Vecna's curse on her, because depression is a monster that you fight over and over and over again. I'm also not mad at her determination to face Vecna again and to be part of the team effort to take Vecna down. I actually really thought it was awesome the way that they all banded together and they were like, okay, you're gonna do this and you're gonna do this and we're gonna make it a team effort because this is one big scary motherfucker, and the only way that we are gonna be able to take him down is if we work together and come at him from many sides.
And they've done that for many seasons. Teamwork is one of the show's strengths. Yeah.
It's showing that on a stereotypical level, like love and friendship defeat evil, but honestly in real life it's love and friendship that defeat evil.
It's more powerful than fear, yeah.
Right. So I'm not mad about her taunting Vecna and like having to go and hide in the light, as she said. Like, not mad about any of that. I'm mad she loses because it's such a strong metaphor. So like she goes through so much. She saves herself. She finds the strength to defend others, and then she gets slaughtered. That's just, again, the implications of that are just really, really upsetting. And even the way that, like, it's shot where it's not like Chrissy or the other people, like, her bones break so slowly. It's terrible. Mm-hmm. And I just, why does she have to, why? I said earlier, like, oh, we have to do all this because Vecna has to be the final boss in season 5. No, he doesn't. You're the writers. You could find some other way for him to live without doing all of this.
Her suffering, there's no way to erase that. And in that way, I think Eddie and Max are incredibly similar, because even if Eddie comes back, at what cost?
He had to go through that.
Kind of bothers me in the sense, something I've been thinking a lot about since Jenna and I had our conversation, is that this idea that Stranger Things has been accused of a lot, which is like it's all style over substance. There's not a lot of depth. I don't agree with that in general, but I think in this case, when it comes to Max, I think part of the reason that it's so brutal is because they thought of this really cool, gruesome horror thing they wanted to do to their victims. But guess what? If you put Max involved, she's got to go through that too. And then suddenly it makes it more real somehow.
Yeah.
Same thing with Eddie and Dustin. Lucas has to carry that moment with him forever. Mm-hmm. Nothing that they do to bring Max back will take that experience away from Lucas.
And Lucas and Erica have to suffer on top of all of that, being targeted for hate crimes.
That too. Would you say that this season for you crossed a line?
Yes. The answer to that question may change, 2 years from now.
Sure.
Like we had 3 years between watching season 3 and reviewing season 3. And I have kind of wondered to myself, like, am I going to need another 3 years before I can, actually be a professional about season 4?
Well, we're going to get 2 years.
So there you go. But I would say, yeah, this season was personally triggering to me. But I would also say that there was a callousness to this season that crosses the line.
An insensitivity.
Yeah. I think Jenna makes a very, very good point about all of the good stuff being from their experience. I think that's probably a big reason why they struggle with female relationships. Why they were so good at depicting the bullying that Mike went through in season 1, and why it was the Angela stuff in season 4 was really just pretty clunky.
Not very grounded.
So I find that I come to a place where I love the characters. I am not suggesting that the Duffer Brothers should write Stranger Things according to my specifications, that they shouldn't kill off a character just because I like him. That's nonsense. But there's such a disconnect, not only with the dedicated audience, but like I said before, with the zeitgeist. I'm starting to wonder, who is this for? Like, is it just for them? I'm not sure.
I was talking with my roommate about the fact that they have their outline. The Duffers have said, like, we know essentially what happens, but they haven't started writing it yet. They took all of July for a break. Mm-hmm. When it hits August, they're going to start writing. Mm-hmm. And there's this question of like, well, but why wait? Like, why haven't they been working on it since, because the writing hasn't necessarily needed to wait until after the visual effects were done. But I think it's because they wanted to see what the reception was. Mm-hmm. And I think that's as much of a Netflix thing as it is a Duffer Brothers thing.
Yeah.
That's I think there's an element of the producers at play in that. So I think that there's a very strong possibility that they may not have necessarily intended for Eddie to come back. But I think it's entirely possible that based on the way people responded to it, they may be making that change.
Yeah.
Like, in a way that won't necessarily impact, like, whatever the big final movements are of the story. But in a way that, like, shit, yeah, that was an error in judgment. Let's bring him back. Mm-hmm. Let's figure out a way to make him Kaz. I think it's incredibly unlikely.
Same.
But if it happens, it'll be like, well, I like, if it happens, I think it'll definitely be that was a response to the response.
I feel messy about this. They do respond to audience response. The Lost Sister episode bombed. Like, we haven't seen 8 since. After folks said, like, oh, seasons 1 and 2 were too similar. Then season 3 was, like, out in left field somewhere.
Jenna phrased it as, like, there's a lack of care.
Yes.
And she meant that in terms of, like, the writing from, like, a character perspective and in terms of, like, the subject matter. But I think there's an aspect of that possibly in play. I think it comes from a place of ignorance to a degree. Like, I don't think that they set out to fuck us over.
No.
Like, and I do want to actually make a point to say that, because I don't think that they are just, like, inherently cruel people who just, they, like, I don't get, like, say, Quentin Tarantino energy from them as a comparison.
No.
Like, that's the difference. And so it's weird because, like, I think part of what I said about Volume 1 was I do feel them trying. I feel effort in some aspects of Volume 1. So I'm confused. But I do think that, as Jenna said last time, yeah, we need to start holding them accountable for the mistakes that they make.
Yes.
And that's something that I'm hoping that the reaction to Eddie and Max, I'm kind of hoping that that's happening.
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, I don't think that the Duffers are terrible people and, like, deserve to be, booed in a restaurant like a Supreme Court justice. I'm trying to be careful about saying like they or like the show and that kind of thing. Like, I'm not trying to put all this on the Duffer Brothers.
Yeah, good point.
There is, it's like a show of this size is a machine.
Mm-hmm. Well, or like if they have ideas that are like, that's not okay, then it's a producer's job to say, we're not doing that.
But I think ultimately what it comes down to is I agree with Jenna in that lack of care. And coming back to my keyword of implications, I think they are just very both unaware and uncaring of the implications of what they are doing from a character perspective, from a plot perspective, from an audience perspective. And it bums me out.
The thing I also want to add that I didn't say in the last episode, that because I've had more time to think about it, is like this concept of death in the show in general. I think I've been really wrestling with like why do I like have this vibe, this feeling, this like insistence on like, but I really think everybody should make it out. Like I've been trying to figure out like where some of that's coming from and why the discussion around that is upsetting. And I think what it comes down to, what I kind of finally figured out is that it's because we're starting to place like value judgments on who should live and who should die.
Yeah.
Who deserves to live?
Yeah.
Who deserves to die? And I hate that. Like I've seen people saying things like, I vote for Mike to die. I vote for this person to die. This person is not nearly as important as this person. They can die. I mean, I've joked about that, but in terms of the villains,
yeah,
like I've said, like Brenner can die.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we doing that? The early parts of the show, it's a story about survival. It's a story about getting through the shit and getting through the shit together. And I'm actually including parts of season 3 in that a little bit. And I feel like season 4 kind of bait and switched that. There's a thematic shift happening. And that's part of why I'm worried about season 5 in terms of, yeah, everybody's fair game. If it comes to like a way that I would prefer them to like break their pattern, then yes, it would be bring Eddie back rather than kill off your core characters. I feel like that's just going to be dark for darkness' sake. And I think that what they've established themselves as being, it's about survival. It's about getting through. I would like to see them continue to be that, but at this point, I don't know. I also want to say that, like, because this is so new, I kind of reserve the right to change my mind. Before this season came out, I said, it's going to be weird coming at this because we've had the first 3 seasons in our cultural consciousness for many, many, many years now. And we've had time to really look at each season and we know the story really well. Like even season 3 was, 2 to 3 years old by the time we started reviewing it. So season 4 is the new kid. But I think that's going to conclude our contemplation on Stranger Things season 4, volume 2. If you've got comments, questions, thoughts, you can join the conversation. We're on Instagram as @coffeeandcontemplationpod, TikTok and Twitter as @coffeeinhawkins. You can also email us at coffeecontemplationpod@gmail.com. All of those links are in the show notes, in addition to links to other videos and such that I mentioned in this episode. Like, share, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and please consider leaving us a review.
Thanks for listening.
Over and out.
Tommy H on. Would you like to comment on the fact that you've never been punched on this show?
I feel so bad about that.
No, don't.
It's not what I said. It's the fact that so many people took so much delight in it online. It makes me feel so bad. Which is why like right after it started getting it got like a bunch of likes. That was why I posted the clip of you saying it's a compliment to the actors how much I cannot fucking stand these two people.
With like, am I the monster? Should I with the powers?
You're the monster. He's the monster.
You, me, and Cookie Monster. Like,